hence it is important for us all to come together to continue and to grow the dialogue on climate change and climate neutrality and climate action, and that we have to put our hands together as the private sector, as the government, as Egyptian citizens and global citizens, and for us to put our hands together with our international partners that want to work together for Vision 2050 and are always here to exchange their experiences, to pass on the knowledge, to address some of the challenges they face, and together I believe that we can push forward an agenda for a true carbon-free, climate-neutral global community by 2050. I want to thank specifically Her Excellency the Ambassador of Finland, His Excellency the Ambassador of New Zealand, not just for being here today, but for their continuous support, not just on climate change, but a lot of things that we address as global trade matters. For them being here today, I think shows the importance of the dialogue on climate change, and I thank them for being here under the circumstances that we're in. We will have to address, of course, what we call the elephant in the room, or the virus in the room, but in the meantime, we would very much like to focus on the reason why we're here, and that is how can we work together and how can we push forward an agenda for climate neutrality. So Your Excellency, Ambassador of Finland, I'd like to start with you. And the first thing is we'd like to share with the audience here and on Cairo Business Radio as well, what is Finland doing as Finland in regards to combating climate change and reaching the goal of 2050 of climate neutrality.
Thank you very much, and I'm honored to be here. I know that time is difficult with everything that happens, but this is something which is very important and very dear to us in Finland, the climate change, and I would like to really to emphasize that, and that's why I came here, even though it has been advised not to participate in any meetings. Yes, as I said, climate is something which is very important to my country, and as a member state of the European Union, we adopted or committed, the European Union committed at the end of last year, when we were to the presidency of the Union, we committed to be climate neutral by 2050. But nationally, we have adopted even more ambitious goal, and we are planning to be climate neutral by 2035. And for that, we have made a program which we try to implement and set a strategy to achieve this plan.
I'll get back to you, but I'll pass the same question over to New Zealand with a little bit of an addition. You had participated at the Climate Neutrality Dialogue on November 27, not yourself, but yes, we had our dear colleague from the Embassy of New Zealand attend with us that event, and a lot have happened since then in New Zealand. What if I understand correctly and our research is correct, that there has been a speeding up since November till today to a lot of directions, a lot of regulations, and a lot of what we can say the drive and the push towards really taking climate action. So it is generalized in a sense, but if you can tell us please how New Zealand is viewing this, and what are these things that have been done in the past maybe 4 months that have really escalated towards climate action?
Climate change is something which New Zealand is taking very seriously. We, of course, are a Pacific Island country, and we're an island nation as well. So, effects of the climate, the issues in terms of global weather pattern changes will have profound implications on our part of the world. So, particularly for our Pacific Island partners, of which there are 14. So, New Zealand's ramped up our efforts. We are certainly committed very much to the Paris goals. But in terms of domestic legislation, we've also introduced the Zero Carbon Amendment to our Climate Change Response Act. And that essentially, it reduces all our greenhouse gases with the exception of biogenic methane to net zero by 2050. And also it sets up in terms of the biogenic methane, we're wanting to have that lowered down to between 24 and 47% of less than 2017 levels. Now, that's a big thing for us because we're an agricultural producing country. So, and methane is one of our main climate change gases that we're wanting to address.
Well, the theme of today's meeting and the composition that was supposed to be here was a lot of people from the private sector, because the theme today is what is the role of the private sector in climate action. And to be honest with you, yes, Egypt discusses a lot of things in terms of the United Nations Development Goals, sustainability, with, of course, decarbon being one of our partners in today's event, and partners on the long run on a lot of things we're working with. So they're very focused on sustainability, but we're very focused on climate action. And the difference here, not that I'm saying the small things that the private sector are doing in terms of maybe changing their light bulbs and fixing their faucets, but the private sector can play a much bigger role. But as we all know, that the private sector always needs incentives, and incentives have to touch the bottom line, or they have to be enforced upon them through policies and regulations and laws. So how is Finland, the Finnish government, working with the private sector in making them morally involved and more involved in the goal of 2025?
Well, first, let me a little bit explain the background of the basis of Finnish thinking. First of all, yes, climate change is a scientific fact, but to combat it, we need politics. We need political decisions, and to implement these political decisions, we need everybody. We need the citizens, the civil society, government, and the private sector. So it has to be a combined effort of all actors in the society. And in this strategy that we have adopted to become climate neutral by 2035, where the industry has a very important role to play. First of all, we have already banned the use of coal for energy by 2029, but at the moment the government is giving incentives, taxation and certain things like that to the energy companies to do that already by 2025, so in 5 years' time. And we have also the very important part is in this strategy is the reduction of emissions from the industry. It's one of those kind of 4 pillars in the strategy. And to achieve that, yes, taxation is one of the tools that can be used, but it's also other kind of support to the industry to make the transformation. We have now established a new climate fund, which can fund, for example, a certain kind of transformation processes, and also from there you can get funding for research, because research is one of the important aspects of this. But on the other hand, we have to say that public funding is not enough. We need also the industry to mobilize their funding for the research. There we are quite lucky in Finland that our industries and the private sector in general, they are very forthcoming to climate action, and they do think that if they are in advance of others, getting these innovations, how to combat the climate change, they will be in an advantage position when others will come behind us.
Thank you, Your Excellency. Also, Finland is being part of the European Union. There is of course the a lot happening on that front. And again, because we are not experts so much in the carbon exchange, but there is a EU carbon exchange policy that is being put together. How does Finland fit into that, and how do you see European countries within the context of the private sector working together on making this happen?
Well, of course, in the European Union we are 27 countries, and we have different stages and different the structure of the industry, structure of the private industry is different from country to country. And at the moment, in fact, we are really working very hard on that how to implement certain things, and this is part of the whole issue, and we think that it is very important. We have certain resources that we have. For example, in Finland, we have a lot of forests that create the sink for the carbon emissions, and but we do think that we have to also find a kind of equitable way to deal with this trade, so that no country will feel that they will be kind of treated unfairly, and this is a sometimes complicated issue.
Agree. In Finland, are you more focused on the tax of the carbon, or actually an exchange of carbon, and how does that fit with the European Union?
Yes, we are more focused on exchange because that is the future. So through that we think that we can get in the future the whole economy also and to work.
Climate change, I'm quite certain, is going to make a complete difference and impact on the way we do business traditionally. Today we're hearing, for example, I would have loved to have Mohamed Farid with us today, but we're hearing about stock exchanges delisting or not listing specific companies if they don't abide with certain certification. And we are here in Egypt as well exploring those options between tax and trade. And that's why it was very important for us to share this information and these experiences. Greg, again, the theme is private sector. And I don't want to mention Corona again, but I've been looking at trying, because obviously we're not an expert on that very specific thing, but I wanted to see what the correlations were, and a lot of that kept on popping up that within the past probably 3 to 4 weeks that carbon emissions have been less, pollution has been less, stress on the planet has been less, but the underlying reason behind it is a virus. And I thought to myself, and mentioned all of these things we've been talking about for years and years, and people like yourselves have been participating in, people like Thomas Kristen from the Danish embassy, who's now the a climate ambassador for Denmark. I mean, so many smart people have been working to try and get these small reductions on the long term when we have actually achieved them in less than 3 weeks. So we've shut down all of Italy because of virus, but we could have done maybe every year 2 weeks of everybody just staying home for climate change could be a solution. But again, the implementation of that is always going to be difficult. In New Zealand, how does the New Zealand government participate with the private sector? Of course, in such a democracy and a free country with probably one of the best developed financial markets in the world, even on the Global Competitiveness Index, you rank #1 on that. How are you participating, engaging, and supporting and incentivizing the private sector to participate in the government's goals?
Well, in terms of how the New Zealand government is interacting with the private sector, it's been something which has been quite a long dialogue that we've had. I think probably about 2018, our Productivity Commission undertook a research proposal where they wanted to look at how New Zealand could best transition to a net zero economy, net zero carbon economy. And they had 174 findings and 77 recommendations based on consultation with the private sector. And one of the things which they found is that consumers were demanding that our businesses take climate action. We've seen it also with our National Retirement Fund as well. There's been a shift away from some sectors which are now no longer seen as being politically viable, for example, in weapons development and things like that, so that we're no longer investing in companies that are affiliated with that. We're moving towards things which are productive and beneficial for the planet essentially, and that includes the climate sector. As I mentioned before, agriculture is a massive exporter for us, and that's also the big bulk of where New Zealand's climate change gases come from. So we've been involved with the Global Research Alliance at a government level. Initially founded in 2009, it started with 21 countries. Now there are 58, and New Zealand's leading in that work to try and improve agricultural processes so that they will then reduce methane. There are 3,000 scientists that are employed with them, and we've just announced a new funding boost to that organisation. And that's essentially to help our farmers and our primary producers to produce food that has as minimal impact upon the environment as possible. And also involved with capacity building. As I mentioned earlier as well, as a Pacific Island country, we feel that we have a social responsibility to our Pacific Island nations, many of which are developing. And so we've developed the Climate Support Fund for them, so that they can also transition and move away from traditional energy sources like coal and oil type things, so that they can be a lot more energy efficient and also reduce their carbon footprint too. So there's a range of different initiatives that we've got. A lot of them are very nature-based. Sometimes it's better and easier just to get back to basics. Our government announced that it was planting 1 billion trees, which for a population of 5 million people, I think we're going to have trees everywhere, of which 150 million have already been planted. So we're on track for that. And that's sort of moving in the direction of, similar to Finland, with the using the trees as a carbon sink. And it's something which I'm very pleased to see.
Look, you don't have a massive population growth as Egypt does, but you do grow on population. And at the same time, with the rise of sea levels, there will be shrinking for that agricultural land availability of that land. So anything that you do in New Zealand, unlike us here in Egypt, where we, I think, intentionally build on our agricultural land and then grow and replant or replant the desert. The whole structure of the New Zealand economy as being based on agriculture on the long term could have a major impact. So what are the long-term industry transformations that might be on the mind of the New Zealand government on the long run?
Absolutely, and this is part of the research which is being undertaken by our scientists as well. So as we are an agricultural country, we're a major dairy producer, for example. And one of the main producers of methane are dairy cows. And so we're looking at what ruminant bacteria are currently in cows and what could potentially be introduced in terms of a different microflora or different micro biome in the cow to actually reduce the methane that they're producing. So it's those sorts of innovative, technologically based initiatives, I think, which the government is focusing on. We're working very closely with the private sector. Fonterra, who's our largest dairy company, they're doing a lot of research in this area as well. And it's not only in terms of the technology, in terms of the microflora of cows, but also what are the impacts that they're having on our rivers and like the runoff of fertilizer into streams and lakes and things. So it's a whole raft of environmentally focused policies, environmentally focused initiatives, and how we can be greener, because that's something which we certainly take very seriously in New Zealand. We're a population of 5 million, our land mass is larger than the UK, so the footprint that we've had on our country has been very low, and that's something which is very remarkable from a tourist point of view, and something we're very, very keen to protect for future generations.
I just have a comment and question, and
who's in the front row?
So the question here is, we're talking about farmers and agriculture, obviously in New Zealand being the predominant industry. But what about the other companies and other industries? What are the incentives there in terms of research, finance, banking? I mean, because it's true, when we do talk about New Zealand, we also talk about the dairy and the agriculture, but you've got a great financial sector and you have manufacturing as well, so how do you look at that?
Sure, absolutely. And the reason I alluded to the agriculture is it's simply because of the size. It's the largest part of our export sort of profile. We've also got an emissions trading scheme as well. We've had that in place since 2008, and that's being reviewed and updated as well. So that's an additional sort of measure. In terms of how the private sector and other areas operate, we find it's very much market driven by the consumers, and we obviously we want to help the producers and industry in order to be as effective as possible, and so government is also following them in terms of better environmental regulations and how we can move this forward, and that's part of that Productivity Commission report that I mentioned, is with all the recommendations. That's right, exactly, yeah.
Obviously, we are a small group, so we don't mind if we do open a bit for questions, if anybody has any questions on that. But until then, Your Excellency, let me get to a very important point. Greg was saying that New Zealand is very, of course, concerned to its neighbours, the proximity around it, the islands around it, and have been creating this. In Finland, we've created the Green Fund for investment inside Finland itself and supporting the European Union. Has a much wider scope in a sense, and I believe, and Dr. Ehab will probably be able to point that out in his presentation or his next presentation, that Egypt requires about $73 billion for us to be able to combat climate change and reach that climate neutrality point. So I can imagine what the rest of the world would require, and of course the European Union, always with its good intentions to support developing nations through technical assistance, through funding. So what is the direction of Finland within that context, and what is the EU direction towards international cooperation funds for climate action, climate mitigation?
Well, like the European Union, Finland also, it's very important for us that in all our funding, what we do, technical cooperation, whatever kind of partnerships we have, the climate is taken into account, so that it's already inbuilt in the whole system, and that's what our colleague Thomas is doing also in Denmark. He is reviewing everything what they are doing, so that they have this climate component, or climate is taken into account. And then, of course, the European Union also is the biggest provider of funding of two different programs that in the environment, and we are contributing to those. We are contributing also what different funds that the international organizations have, and that is something also in our programs, that this is an important thing. And it's also related to the fact that we do think that we have to do things in a sustainable way. You cannot isolate the climate just from the whole everything else. You have to take into account the other issues at the moment, and this equitability is very, very important. So if the climate actions lead to situations where the differences inside the societies and between the societies will increase, then it will not succeed. To be successful, we have to do it in such a way that it's fair to everybody, to be fair inside our own society, it's fair at the international level.
Yes, absolutely, and we talk about the inclusion, we talk about gender equality, which is extremely important. And inclusion, like you said, the isolation is always where the issue is. I just have two final, basically, question for each of you. And since we are in Egypt, and I know that there is great international cooperation and partnerships between our country, New Zealand, and Finland, what are any specific things, programs, directions, that Finland can be working with Egypt on at this point that we can share with our private sector?
Well, something which we would like very much to do is to work for circular economy, which hasn't been yet mentioned. That because to be able to combat climate change, we have to change our way of thinking completely. We have to move from make, use and dispose idea to the circular economy. And circular economy doesn't mean that you take your old clothes to somebody and recycle, but it's something that you have to start from the very beginning. That the resources are used in a sustainable way, in such a way that what we produce it well. The products can be repaired, and once they can't be used anymore, they can be recycled. So it's complete different way for those. And another thing, when I have the floor here, I want to mention also that very good initiative that in fact Finland and Chile last year we made this initiative of a coalition of finance ministers, because finance ministers are usually those who are sitting on the fund. So we try to have this consciousness about climate change through the finance ministers, and I think that is a very good way to try to get funding for needy things.
And this is a bilateral coalition between Finland and
within
Chile,
UN.
Within the UN itself. Very good. I think that would be a good option if we join that as well. Greg, I would ask the same question on a more specific Egypt front. I mean, where are the points and opportunities for collaboration on international corporations?
Sure. Absolutely. Well, New Zealand and Egypt are actually working closely already as part of this, the Global Research Alliance in the agricultural space. So our scientists are collaborating together already to work and to develop better agricultural programs and whatnot. We've also done some work with the Egyptians in regards to fossil fuel subsidy reform. Of course, we applaud the Egyptian government's moves to reduce the subsidies on fossil fuels last year. I know it was part of an IMF program. I know it was a tough and challenging position, but it will reduce greenhouse gases, which are affecting Egypt and affecting all of us. Just on that, I know if fossil fuel subsidies were removed globally, I understand it would free up $565 million into the global economy, which is significant. So it's those sorts of things which are, I think we can continue to work with Egypt on. One of the things which I wanted to mention before as well is climate change is also about security, and it's something which I think as we sort of sit here in this very much a time of global response of this virus, which is a security issue for us all as well. We've currently got a crisis which is affecting us, and we've seen quite extreme responses which are necessary by international partners. And I think that the times arrive where, because the climate change isn't seen to be as dramatic perhaps, that we're not giving the climate the due attention that it deserves. So I'm quite heartened to see the international collaboration that's happened with COVID-19, and I hope that continues in the climate space as well, because the climate, once it does change, there will be a flow-on effect. It will affect not only our weather patterns, it will affect our food production, affect migration, a whole raft of things which is going to change the way that our civilization operates. So so thank you for hosting this today and bringing attention to this, because I think it's an ongoing dialogue. We've each got national interests that we need to work on, but it's only when we work together that we achieve results. And I think we really need to pull together on the climate as well, because there's been a lot of talk, a lot of hot air, the time for action is now.
It's like Her Excellency said. I mean, we can talk forever. It's all about politics, and for the private sector, and this has been said to us, it's all about the bottom line, the economies that come with climate change. We've got to make it make sense, not just for the private sector, but for us individuals. And when you do convince us that we will reduce our electricity bill by using solar power, and it hits our bottom line, our pockets, that's when people start to make change. But we don't have the luxury of time anymore for us to see our bottom lines and how this is going to impact us on the short term. And regarding the circular economy, Mr. Mohamed Naguib, who runs Geocycle in Egypt, one of the global providers of solutions for waste management in the industrial sector, and I believe more companies like them operating in Egypt, where they take the whole supply chain. It's not just about what goes on the output, but how do we manage the input, and companies like Decarbon that are advising companies on sustainability and becoming a little bit more active on climate action. So I think we are trying to do our part here in Egypt as much as we possibly can, and I believe as long as we continue the dialogue going, sharing the experiences and knowledge, learning from each other's challenges, working together and collaborating, I believe that we could make some kind of impact and change. That's if we all survive the next, but it doesn't have to be either or. It doesn't have to be either we're all stuck at home because of the virus, or we forget that climate change is happening around us. Again, I will leave a room for any questions. Dr. Ali, if you want to make a comment, please.
My name is Ali Aoui, I'm from American University in Cairo. Now, New Zealand and Finland are really exemplary countries. But the fact remains that even both countries and Egypt are very minor polluters. They are very minor emitters of CO2. I mean, the last COP25 was an utter failure. And the reason it was an utter failure is because of the US, because of if the US says we're not gonna comply, naturally China and India, followed with South Africa, Brazil, and even Australia, and naturally also the oil-producing countries are not obliged. Now, what's going to change going in the future? I mean, really, we have to sort of take a policy, as you mentioned, which is more of an international level, which will push those guys to comply. Because otherwise, whatever we do is not going to work.
Your comments?
Absolutely, and I'd agree that we have to follow a science-based approach with this. We have to try and divorce politics as much as possible and acknowledge, and follow the science. One of the challenges, I think, for countries like us is to build an international consensus on these sorts of things, because there are powerful international lobbies that are influencing other governments. In terms of US or Australian policies, I'll leave those to the ambassadors of those countries to comment on, but certainly it is a priority of my country to build consensus, to collaborate, to share information that we've got, and to try and nudge the international community into the direction that we all need to go.
Yes, we are very much aware that we are a small country, small economy in the global economy. But we do also think that you have to start from home. You do what you can in your own country, and then you can claim also and try to be the example to in the international fora that things can be done. it's not the question about that they cannot be done. And also, as I told, our private sector really thinks that if they are able to develop solutions to different problems, they will win at the end, because they will gain. They will make the profit out of those innovations that will come.
And it's possible to add one more comment as well. It doesn't have to be government driven as well. As we've seen in the United States, some cities, civilians are taking leadership in this space. And I believe, when you get enough momentum of the population, governments, if they're wise, they'll follow. Go ahead, please.
Thank you so much, Your Excellencies. Thank you so much, Ashraf. It's a pleasure to see resilience in the decision-making process here. And I'd like to capitalize also on Dr. Ali Aouni comment for New Zealand and Finland being exemplary countries. But I'd like to take it from a different perspective. Until today, I can see that official development assistance or international cooperation is still taking the perspective of the old structures and old mechanisms. Yes, we are embedding climate change in the ODAs, but unfortunately, still we are embedding it artificially. It cannot be, you cannot utilize the same old machine. And my suggestion here, as a person who is working with the private sector across different sectors, is that for each country to capitalize on its competitive advantage and competitive edge, i.e., for New Zealand with a great history in agriculture and a massive agricultural portion inside its GDP and technology, I think New Zealand could focus more sectoral rather than focus more on just working on different fronts. This is where you have the experience and expertise, and this is where you can help the agriculture sector in Egypt. The agriculture sector in Egypt is contributing approximately 10% in the global, in the Egyptian CO2 emissions, and it's directed to increase dramatically. On the other hand, for Finland, I have been witnessing an educational system and how the educational system has been working with climate change and sustainability in general. I think this is an area where Finland can interfere very easily. A second area of intervention is financial technologies, where I can see also a move on the financial technologies fronts and inclusion financial, which would support in Egypt the process of financial inclusion. So my question is, why should not we capitalize or work sectorally rather than utilizing the same old umbrella? And do you believe that this would help or not? And what are the challenges, of course? Thank you so much.
We do. Again, this is like the Global Research Alliance I was talking about before. So we have this partnership of 51 nations working together with scientists collaboratively sharing research and looking at means and how they can improve the agricultural sector, particularly vis-a-vis climate change gases. So it is happening. In terms of, and of course that is our strength, I think, in terms of working with Egypt. In terms of bilaterally, that's probably the next area where we look at more closely. So it's not just as part of this wider coalition, but actually getting our scientists and our educational institutions more closely linked up.
Yes, education is something which we usually take up in these kind of discussions, that it's also part of the climate change, because the change has to start already from schools. I didn't take it up here because I thought it probably goes a little bit away from the private sector as such, but yes, we do think, and we are, for example, we are trying to cooperate here in Egypt in the field of education, and it's very important part of the whole picture.
Absolutely, I remember having a conversation when we were talking about global competitiveness, and obviously Finland being the #1 competitive country on education. And I remember you specifically saying, this was about 2 years ago, it cannot be a cut and paste situation, because your system in Finland cannot just be copy and pasted here. But I totally agree with Dr. Naguib that your knowledge and experience will really help. Please.
Thank you very much for this really useful seminar. But now we are dealing with the result of global changing, but we didn't act with the root cause analysis to why we reached this point. Because I'm just telling you, Ashraf, we studied since 25 years that we will reach this point, but not like such maximum figures we reach now. This is completely dramatic change, even much than expectation. This means that we need a politic way or regulation from the United Nations. It is not the working for some funding to making some plan to how to stop this or to deal with this. But we need a regulation and follow by the nation. Till now, if you know, or everyone knowing for this, such like Kyoto agreement, not all the nations signed this. For this, still suffering. I think it's quite opinion. Thank you.
Well, if I may comment, yes, I agree, but the United Nations can do only as much as the individual member states agreed them to do. So it's we cannot kind of put it outside and say that there is international organization that has to impose it. We have to be ready. Each and every country have to be ready to agree on it, and of course that's what we all try to do and promote this thinking that there are actions that has to be done.
And of course, in terms of there's also the Paris Agreement of 2016. So that's I guess the latest benchmark agreement, which provides countries who have signed up to it commitments to reduce their climate change gases. And I think all but one, I think, have signed. So and unfortunately, that one's a big polluter. But again, hopefully, you know, by countries taking action, and as the ambassador said, by starting at home and showing what works, showing that countries shouldn't be scared of these sorts of changes, then hopefully, inshallah, that one other country will come and join us as well.
And I think that could be open for a very, very big issue on how these international organizations are being funded and the weight that comes with that funding. So I don't think it's a real, true, biased process.
I mentioned this because as you know, the result of cutting trees in Amazon affects climatic change. Building dams without any regulations also affects the dryness in some areas. For this, it needs a power and regulation to be followed, not only for governmental individual. Because if I'm doing something individuals, I affect only myself, but not the others. But climatic change is affected by all the nations, not only one. Of course, we have to start by ourselves, of course. But even without any global controlling or regulation or something, plans have to be followed. Really need something to think about it. Thank you.
Again, despite the circumstances, we have been under this, had to be done, and I'm so happy that you have both given us the honor of being here and really, really showing that we have to continue this dialogue. I thank you again, Your Excellencies, for being here. I know I don't want to take any more of your time, and we will continue our day talking about with the Egyptian Parliament now, with Dr. Ehab, to see what Egypt is doing in terms of its applications and its reporting to the bodies that we're talking about, like the United Nations. So, thank you very much. Thank you. It's such a pleasure. Thank you for the opportunity. Improvising today, of course, under the circumstances. That's good.
very, very talented Muslim documentaries who talks about all the time. He asked me a million times after I had sent you the letter.
I don't, yes, we shouldn't. I don't either. I shouldn't. I keep remembering it. Have you seen that Prince Charles speech? He put out his hand and then by the side, so this is what we do. It's a pleasure. It was a very necessary session.